estimated for 2023. Let's lead that off with Will. Share us a little bit about what you saw last 6 months and what you're thinking ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Would you mind putting the first slide up for me?
Yep.
So this probably looks very familiar to anybody who has borrowed money in the last 12 months. And this is the stepping up of the Fed funds rate. So we were here in January of 22, and then by the end of the year, we're all the way up to 4.5. To give you some concept of what banking industry was planning on is the Federal Reserve said, we're going to probably forecast an increase of 50 basis points from January of 22 all the way through December. That is what they forecasted a year ago. We ended up going up 4.25%. So it's a dramatic change, but then on top of that, it's caused 3 fallout items that are happening in our industry right now. The first is, and it's probably no surprise to anybody here, there's a liquidity crunch in banking. There is not as much cash available to lend as there was a year ago. There just is. There's less cash. Anybody who's in the banking industry knows right now they're asking you to find, and where's my team at? Deposits. Go find deposits. That is more important than loans right now inside of banking. So I want to make sure all of you investors understand that. It's more important for banks to have deposits right now than it is to have long-term loans. And you'll see why in a second when I show that. So that liquidity crunch is there. Secondly, banks have alternative methods of investing now that can drive a return that's acceptable. When Fed funds gets to 4.5%, rather than 1/4%, we now can go invest in mutual bonds, AAA quality, taxable, tax exempt, that drive a strong return with no risk. Unlike lending in general has at least some measure of risk. So we can get a good return in an alternative investment right now. So you have a liquidity crunch and things in which you can invest in alternatively. So might you move to the next slide for me? So then here's the next slide that creates some problems for banks. And that is, this right now is a FOMC dot plot map. I don't know if many have heard of this, but there's, I think it's 13 governors inside the Federal Reserve, and each one of them every quarter give an estimate of where they think Fed funds is going to be for a certain target. I apologize in advance if this is incredibly complicated, but I'll do my best to explain it. Those who know me know I have no problem talking, so I apologize to all of you in advance. So here we are. So the dot map at the end of the year was right around 4.5, which is our Fed funds rate right now. By the end of 23, it's forecasted to go to roughly 5.25. So that means prime is going to be 8.25 is what the governors are all pretty much uniformly saying. Every little dot is one of the governors. So the vast majority of the governors are saying we're going to be at 5.25, and you have a couple up there at 5.75. So that means prime is going to be between 8.25 and 8.75 sometime at the end of the year in 23. But look at the decline of it over the years coming in 24, 25, and even longer. It shows it's going to be dropping in 24 to roughly 4.25. 25, they expect it to be at 3.25, and down the Fed funds at the end of 25 and going forward, it's going to be around 2.5. So the days of having free cash, the Federal Reserve is saying, is gone. You're not going to see prime at 3.25 again. So that's the first thing to think about if you're a developer is don't plan on having cheap 3-4% financing. They're saying that's never coming back in the long term. They don't want to ever get back to that world again. It came to us because of catastrophes that happened around us, but they never want to go back there again. So the lowest they're forecasting is being at 5.5. So if you're going to use some cost of money going forward, imagine no less than 5.5%. Does that make sense to everybody? That's what they're telling us. So if you're a bank, you've got these sharp increases that have happened from 22 all the way through 23, and then a sharp decline. The cost curve that's happening in our industry mirrors this. So it's cheaper to borrow right now for 5 years than it is to borrow for 18 months. That inverted yield curve leads us to believe that a recession's on its way. Except the issue is, I shouldn't say except, but in addition, that difference between the yield curve in the short term and the long term is as big as it's ever been. Usually it's 50 basis points. We're talking almost 200. That shows the uncertainty of the market. You'll find banks are careful about how long they're going to start committing loans to. If you even try to be a depositor for a CD right now, you would notice that you can get a great 1-year CD rate and a pretty poor 3-year CD rate because we don't know where rates are heading in an industry. So when it's going to come time to lending money, it's that same uncertainty as present. It's going to be very challenging to try and get a bank to say, I'm going to do a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year fixed rate right now. That's going to be anywhere, I should say, in the 6-7% range. They're going to be saying it's going to be up and down there. You're not going to have any consistency between banks. We're going to push you to more swap products, more off-balance sheet derivative products, where a third party is going to carry that risk rather than the bank. Does that make sense to everybody? Uncertainty in rates causes banks to try and push that risk in a different direction. It can be through a derivative or a swap, which is going to be something off balance sheet. Some other provider is going to hold it. Or we're just going to give you a shorter commitment until we get more clarity around where long-term rates are going to go. So furthermore, this increase is telling us a recession's coming, right? That inverted yield curve we talked about. A recession's coming. That's the third risk we're going to talk about. Banks' traditional playbooks in recessions are going to say, for real estate, don't do any speculative lending. Don't do where there's a lot of vacancy. Try and make it where there's a lot of pre-lease up. Land development loans for building expansion for residential properties are typically ones you shy away from. But as I mentioned earlier, we're in a better jump-off point than other areas in the country are, and frankly, better jump-off point going into a recession than any time in my lifetime of doing this for over 30-some years. So banks are caught in this risk dynamic of saying, we're heading into a recession, but boy, we look really good. We look really good. So if you can find a way to strip the speculative income out of the project, you're going to find it's going to keep moving forward because our vacancy rates are so low, and the property values, to what Tyler said, are still strong in Fort Wayne area, Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio. But when it gets to the rate component of it, you're going to find people are shying away because the profit model isn't certain for years, 26 and beyond. 3 years from now, we just don't know what it's going to look like. All right, thank you.